So, leadership versus management. Where do we go from here? Where do we start? I think the best place to start is with a good story, okay? And I'm a basketball fan. I grew up in Indiana, so I love basketball. When the execs and I were in Indianapolis, we saw a statue of a guy with a bunch of socks, and that was Coach John Wooden. So let me tell you a little story about Coach John Wooden and socks and shoes. John Wooden was the coach of UCLA, that's the University of California, Los Angeles, from the mid-70s to somewhere in the 1990s. He is known as, from ESPN, the coach of the 21st century. Not just basketball, not just college, but the coach of the 21st century. He won 10 national championships, 10 of them. No other coach has ever done that. No other school has that many championships, which I'm sad to say because Indiana only has 5. But that's more than Ohio State. Excuse me again. So Coach Wooden had 10 national championships, 7 in a row. Now just think about that. 7 years of we're the best team in the country. We're the best team in the country. We're the best team in the country. And now think about some of the players that he had play for him. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, who played for the Los Angeles Lakers. Bill Walton, who was a college, and you'll hear him on ESPN or even on NBA radio or whatever. He was one of his players. So, I mean, you had some big egos. You had some great players. And if you're winning 7 national championships in a row and you're recruited to play for UCLA, you're probably a high-quality recruit. You're not this guy that's walking on going, I hope that I make this basketball team. You're recruited, so that's what happened. So the first day of practice, here's what Coach Wooden would do. He'd get his team in a circle at midcourt, and they'd sit down. And he'd say, okay, take off your socks, take off your shoes. And he would proceed to show them how to put on their socks and their shoes. Just imagine, I told you that he won 7 national championships in a row. Some of these players are coming from New York, Chicago, other places that have played big-time high school basketball, and they're looking at him. Do you think that some of them are looking at Coach going, what are you, my socks, my shoes? But what Coach Wooden was trying to get them to understand was a couple of things. One, if you put your socks on right, you're not going to get blisters. And if you don't get blisters, you can play longer. Who do we represent? We represent the University of California, Los Angeles. You play for UCLA. Why are we here? We're here to win championships. So you can't win championships if you're doctoring your feet on the sidelines. So that was the socks. Why do you tie your shoes the right way? Well, if you don't have your shoes tied the right way, you're going to sprain your ankle a little bit more. And we can't win championships if we don't have people that can play. So what he was trying to do was show them the who and the why and the what. Here's what I expect from you. Coach Wooden is on record saying that a player's shoes and his socks are his most important equipment. Now think about that for a basketball player. I wouldn't have thought of that when I read that this week. A basketball is the most important equipment in a basketball game. But Coach John Wooden, the coach of the 21st century, says it's shoes and socks. He showed them what was expected, and then he showed them how to do it. Now, think about this. Bill Walton, Player of the Year, if you know anything about Bill Walton, he was a rebel without a cause. So he was Player of the Year after they won the national championship the year I was born in 1973. So he was Player of the Year at that time, came in the next year, and Coach gets him in a circle, and you think that Bill Walton was the first guy to go, hey, yeah, guys, we're going to take off our socks, we're going to take off our shoes. No, Bill Walton fought that. So what we see from Coach Wooden is that we see this consistency, this reliability. So when we get into leadership and management, leadership is more of that opportunity to create a healthy organization. Management is just what's required. Patrick Lencioni in his book, The Advantage, says that there are some organizations that are smart, meaning they have good finance, they have good marketing, they have all these things. He says that's requirement. There are few organizations that are healthy. And what he means by that is the idea that he wants us to understand what we believe and communicate that over and over and over and over and over again. So my premise today is to tell you that it's not leadership versus management, it's leadership and management. It's something that is required together because effective managers need leadership because without it, they can't get their team to buy in. And if your team doesn't buy in and you're just trying to manage, what happens? All the thing that happens is that they're just doing the work because you told them to do the work. So leadership or management requires leadership, but leadership also requires management, because I might be this leader and I might say, well, I've got all these great ideas and I'm inspirational and all these things, but if I'm not consistent, reliable, and dependable, are people going to follow me? No, and then that blows up that leadership part. So let's define these things. Leadership is stewardship, influence, and service. When you look at leadership in that way, you understand that leadership is team-driven, it's people-driven. It's proactive, it's creative, it takes risk, and it answers these questions, the who and the why. Who am I? Who are we? Who is the team? Why do we exist? Why am I here? What are my passions? So it answers and focuses us and provides clarity for the who and the why. Now, when you get into management is getting work done through others. So if you were in my management class last semester, you heard that over and over and over again. Management is getting work done through others. Management, the qualities are it's reactive. I'm managing because this is what I've got here in front of me. I got to react to that. It's task-driven, it's structure-based, it's process-based. There's nothing wrong with management. You need to be good managers, but the management focuses on and answers the questions of what is expected and how do we do it. So how do we put these two together? How do we put the work in to get these two together? And it reminds me, when I walked outside yesterday and they're harvesting soybeans and corn, I started to think about what those farmers had to do in the winter, in the spring, and even some of them back in the fall when they're fertilizing their fields or getting their fields ready so that it's prepared to harvest in the next couple of weeks. So what we need to do is we need to do that work before the work. You're going to laugh in a little bit, but it's that entrepreneurship, that idea that are you willing to build a foundation that you can develop and that you are reliable. That's the work. So the work in starting to understand leadership and management is understanding that you've got to know your story and you've got to know other people's story. So when I look at leadership and management, I understand it from personal assessment, organizational awareness, and then what do I know about my teammate? Because if I don't know, first of all, who I am, why I exist, what I expect of myself and others, and how I work and serve, then all I'm doing is trying to make it up as I go. And I know it might be unnatural for us to stop and go focus on yourself first, but if you look at Scripture over and over again, David says in the Psalms, is like, God, search my heart. So I don't think David's just praying and going, hey, God, search my heart and see if there be any wicked way in me. I think David is searching his heart. I think David at that time is looking at himself and going, God, am I on the right path? Am I really understanding who you created me to be? Then you also see the verses that David wrote in Psalms 139, that we are fearfully and wonderfully made. So you've got your personal assessment. You know yourself so you could serve others. Then you've got organizational assessment, which I think is really important, or awareness, is because if you don't know the team, the family, the group that you're a part of, how do you serve them? How do you manage things? So if I don't know Cedarville, how do I manage my responsibilities? If I don't know that Dr. White likes it this way, or John Wood likes it this way, or Mindy May, or Brad Smith, or, any of these people like it a certain way, how do I serve them? How do I manage my responsibilities? Peter Drucker talks about knowledge workers, and meaning that you are all responsible for the organization that you're in. As a family member, you're responsible for the family that you're in. You can't be responsible if you don't know. So you got to know yourself, you got to know the organization, and here's the thing that we miss a lot in leadership and management. You don't know the people around you. And you might throw your hands up right now and go, okay, that's easy for you to say. You're a director, you have people that report to you. I'm talking about this. This has got to start even if you've got no title, even if you have no position of authority. Because my number one job is to figure out, at Cedarville, my number one job is to figure out what John Wood wants and to do what I can to meet his needs, not my needs. And then I got to figure out my colleagues. I got to know what Mindy wants. I got to know what Aaron Cook wants. I got to know what Brad Smith or Brandon Waltz or anybody else at Cedarville. I got to know what faculty expect from me so that I could serve them. And then I got to know what you want. I got to know who you are. I got to find out who your passions are. When I've done those three things and I know my story, I know our story, and I know your story, I could start to manage and lead you. If I don't know your story, then all I'm doing is managing you, going, okay, do this, do that, don't do this, don't do that. But if I know your story and I know what you're passionate about, I can put you in a place that will make you better and maybe give you an opportunity. So we've talked about the work. And after you've done the work that's there, here's a couple of things that you need to understand about management and leadership. It's nothing more, it's nothing less than service and serving people. Great managers serve. Great leaders serve. It's a service ethos. And when I looked up and I started to research more of that definition of an ethos, it's a character. It's a philosophy. It's a default action. So is your default action in hanging out with your friends or managing your workload serving, or is it responding? Is your default action serving, or is it, you know what can they give to me? That's the difference between leadership and management. And so what does that ethos require? It requires these three things. One, you got to live it. John Wooden every year did the same thing. Every year he coached. Take your socks off, take your shoes off. Let me show you how to do that. Every single year. He lived it. He set the tone. He set the pace. Nehemiah did that. One of the best examples of leadership and management in Scripture is Nehemiah. Nehemiah lived it. So after you live it, you've got to communicate it. As a manager and a leader, you have to communicate it. Repeat, 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 repeat. If it's worth it, repeat it. I think a lot of times people say, well, I said that one time, I don't need to say it again. Every day when the kids get out of the car at Cedar Cliff, which they'll do in just a few minutes, I say, see you at 3, I love you. And I make sure that I repeat that every single day so they never doubt that. Same thing with management, same thing with leadership. Not saying that you love each other, but it's repeating what you believe. So after you know it, or you live it, and you communicate it. Actually, one more thing with communicate before we go any further. You've got to show people the successes and the failures. You've got to expose those. That makes sense on failures. So yeah, expose my failures. Please, expose my failures. But what about successes? As a leader, as a manager, you're showing people when they did it right, but you're also showing them when they did it wrong. You're not trying to hide failures. You're not trying to hide successes. That's management and that's leadership. And then the last one that you're trying to do with leadership and management is the idea that you demand it. It requires extraordinary effort. Perfection is a myth. If you think that you could be perfect, well, wake up. You can't. Perfection's a myth. Effort is attainable and realistic. It's the only thing that we can attain is our effort. We cannot attain perfection. So I got to demand extraordinary effort in what we do. I've also got to make sure that I'm holding you accountable and I'm holding myself accountable. This is a no status quo zone, meaning I can't be willing to say, well, I love you, so I'm not going to tell you the whole truth. No, I'm going to say the whole truth because I love you. My friend Brian says that don't speak the truth in love at all times, but don't cut the truth in half and call it love. Speak the truth. And then the last one is you're doing it for their effort. So when you demand it, you're doing it for their effort or for their benefit. So you're doing it for God's glory, their good, the organization's benefit, and your joy. Now think about that. When you lead and manage somebody, it's for God's glory. Number 2, it's for their good. Number 3, it's for the organization's benefit. And the last one is it's really fun to do. When you see somebody take off and do something, it's a lot of fun to see that happening. So when I'm looking at management and leadership, to wrap this up, I'm trying to understand 3 things. I'm trying to understand my blind spots, trying to see like, hey, where do I go wrong? And I even did this yesterday. I know a blind spot of me is if I don't know the whole facts, I'm going to jump to conclusions. I did that yesterday, even though I knew my blind spot. But knowing my blind spots, knowing my opportunities, what do I want to do? What do you want to do? I ask people all the time, hey, what do you want to do in this? And that's opportunities. And the last one is preferences. My preferences doesn't mean it mandates that I always act that way. I am an extrovert. There are times in meetings with other people at Cedarville that I have to act introverted because that's what the team needs. Just because I'm an extrovert, it doesn't mean I need a demand from all of you that you accept me as an extrovert. So management and leadership, or leadership and management, is all about service. It's messy, it's time-consuming, it doesn't require a title, but you need to start now. And that's knowing your story, it's knowing the organization's story, it's knowing other people's story, it's living that ethos of service, it's communicating that ethos of service, and it's demanding it. So for me, even this morning at 5 o'clock, when I went to put on my socks and shoes, I was just thinking, man, well, how am I going to serve today? So if that's all that you get out of this, is that every time that you put on a flip-flop or your socks and shoes, that you remember that management and leadership, or leadership and management, is service, great. You'll do fine.